hard to comprehend how one 24-hour period can shape your thinking and impact your life. But the 24 hours I spent in Shell in the jungles of Ecuador impacted me greatly. This rainforest serves as the backdrop for one of the greatest stories in missions history. In the 1940s, 5 men and their wives and families left the United States of America and headed to the jungles of Ecuador. Their dream was to reach the indigenous tribal people that lived in the heart of the jungle with the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. They had no idea their lives would forever change missions and would be impacting us so many decades later. As we flew over the jungle and looked down on the river, it was hard for me to believe that 60 years later, I was retracing their steps. There were 4 of us that day that climbed on board a small plane in Shell. We had read their stories and knew of their sacrifice, but we never dreamed we'd have the opportunity to pay them our respects. After several years of working with the friendlier tribes in the Ecuadorian jungle, Ed McCullough, Jim Elliott, Peter Fleming, Roger Udarian, and Nate Saint combined their efforts to try to reach the most dangerous tribe in the rainforest, the Aucas. For months, Nate, a pilot, flew over the jungles looking for the huts of this elusive group of warriors. On a sunny day in 1955, he spotted the tribe for the first time. For the next several months, he would fly over their area dropping them gifts. But in January 1956, these 5 men landed on a sandbar in the middle of Auca territory. For several days, they had friendly conversation with 3 of the Aucas. But on January the 8th, a war party returned to the beach and speared all 5 men. As we headed down the jungle path towards the sandbar where these 5 men had given their lives for the cause of Christ, 1,000 thoughts flooded my mind. Our guide pointed out the spot where the men had set up camp and later been killed. It was a somber moment. We were all asking ourselves hard questions. Would I have this kind of courage? Do I love that much? But the story doesn't end there. It doesn't end at the sandbar. Months after their husbands were killed, Elizabeth Elliott and Rachel Saint, sister to Nate Saint, moved into the Auca tribe with the very people who had taken their loved ones' lives. They were led into the village by a woman by the name of Dayume. She was an Auca who had trusted Christ and wanted to see her people come to know the Lord. Rachel and Dayume were buried next to the church that was established during their time in the village. We now stood at their graves, moved to tears by the love and the courage these women showed at a pivotal time in their lives.
Hi everybody, this is Allison coming to you from the village of Toñampari, as you can see on the sign back there. We're standing at Rachel Saint and Dayuma's burial site. If you remember, Rachel is the sister of Nate Saint, and after those missionaries were killed, she came in and just lived among the people. Dayuma was a Waodani woman who helped her during those throughout her whole entire life. They worked together, and they are buried side by side here. Dayuma died in 2013. On the right is Rachel Saint's house. Dayuma's family lives there now. But the story of Dayuma has resonated with me since I was a teenager, reading the stories of these missionaries, and her special commitment to helping the missionaries give everything they had in a time that was just of great sacrifice. And so we're here right now with a bunch of little kids standing around, and it just reminds us that there is a new generation to be won, and it's going to take more sacrifice, just like these women paid.
We thought our day was done as we crawled back onto the plane and headed back to Shell. But as we looked back over the river where the men had given their lives, we had no idea that God had greater things in store for us. A storm had blown up in Shell, and our pilot was told he could not land. He informed us that we would be diverting our course and landing on another jungle airstrip and visiting another tribe. As we crawled out of the plane, our pilot told us that this was the tribe where Dewey lived. Dewey was one of the men who killed the missionaries. He had trusted Christ in the year following the killings. He was now 86 years old. Dewey had been fishing when he saw our plane coming in, so he headed over to meet us. As is his practice, Dewey stopped to pray with the pilot. Before long, we were headed back to Shell, and the storm had cleared. But none of us will forget the day that we met Dewey, sitting in a village in the middle of the jungle of the Ecuadorian rainforest. After spending the night in Shell, we woke up the next morning to visit the Nate Saint house. This was the very kitchen where the women were informed that their husbands were gone. Photos hang on the wall. The old radio room with the receiver still exists. Parachutes hang on the walls where they found Nate Saint was collecting them to drop goods to the jungle people. Roger Udarian's trunk leans against the wall, and of course, the Bible, now translated in the people's language of the Woadani. Before we left Shell, we had one more stop to make. iTech was created by Steve Saint, who happens to be the son of Nate. Steve is very gifted in creating objects that will make life in the jungle easier. For example, this dental or examination table is foldable and can be carried into the jungle on someone's back, and it allows a doctor or a dentist to work on the people who are in need. iTech works with jungle people around the world, but they are most famously known for their building of airplanes. These airplanes are used to carry important supplies to remote locations around the world. In this picture, the young man in the blue is the grandson of Minkaya, who killed Nate Saint. He now works for iTech and builds airplanes. On the wall in the Saint's home is this verse. It was written by him in both English and Spanish. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it. Luke 9:24. 24 hours walking in the steps of great men and women of God could be summed up with this simple verse. Jim Elliot put it this way: he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose.